So I have a question here about medication for anxiety, and one of the side effects is weight gain, which is true. There are various anxiety and depression medications that do have a side effect of weight gain, among other medications. But she says here in the last 2 months that I've been on meds, I've put on close to 10 pounds. My body feels sluggish. My cravings feel chaotic and irresistible. And I'm gaining weight that I've worked so hard to lose in a sustainable way. Any advice? She does go through, there's a whole discussion there where she answers some additional questions and another question tacked onto that about how to trust internal cues and hunger and satiety when they're being affected by outside factors such as medication, insomnia, menopause. Are those cues less trustworthy in these situations? Which I think this is such a great question. I love this question because I think it's a great reminder, high level, that internal cues, relying on our hunger and satiety, is just one of the many tools in our hunger or our eating skills toolbox, right? So they're one of my favorite skills and habits. There are one of our core four focuses. Obviously, if you've been around for a while, you know that you've heard us talk about hunger and satiety many times. But if they don't work, they're temporarily out of commission, you're struggling to use them, you're struggling to access them, that's not the end all be all, right? They are one of many tools. So, but backing up here just a little bit, I do want to say that it's not in my scope of practice as a nutrition coach to make any recommendations about medications, but I do think it's worth, and I think that she mentioned this in the comment section, if it's applicable and something that's available to you, maybe having a conversation with your doctor about side effects, concerns. Some medications you might have a better experience on some medications versus others. I think there's different classifications and research on a lot of these SSRIs and various anxiety and depression medications. So it might be a matter of playing around. I do think this person in particular mentioned that this is already her second medication, so she might have tried that. But if you haven't, that might be a good first step, because experts aren't certain about how and why some anxiety depression medications that cause weight gain, and if they will. There are theories on how it might affect our metabolism, our hunger. I personally, and I know that this is another one of the theories, that your appetite might be decreased if you are feeling anxious or depressed, and as you take medication to reduce the symptoms or the experience of anxiety and depression, your appetite might return. I was always one of those people that as a kid, I thought, I never get so stressed that I just can't eat. That was not an experience that I had ever had until I became older. And I'm not exactly sure what happened, but in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, when I get extremely stressed, when I start to notice anxious feelings increase, my appetite just tanks. So if that's something that you're dealing with, again, as you work to alleviate the anxiety, depression symptoms that you're experiencing, that might include an increase in your appetite. So if you feel, though, that medication or your stage of life, like I said, lack of sleep or periods of high stress, maybe it's high work stress, maybe it's relationship stress, financial stress, that are affecting your connection to your internal cues. As I said, remember that your internal cues are just one of the many tools we have to help us manage our eating choices. And this is where tracking habits can come in really, really handy. So when you look back at the past few months since you started medication, how have your behaviors changed at all? If at all, sorry. How have your behaviors changed, if at all? For example, how consistent have you been with checking in with your hunger before eating and your satiety at the end of the meals? While signals might be a little fuzzy or a little hard to hear, are you still being intentional about at least doing your best with what you can and what you have to check in with yourself? As I've shared on the podcast before and on this Facebook Live, I am on medication for ADHD, which reduces my hunger and satiety, especially earlier on in the day. So I have noticed that while I don't feel a stomach hunger, I do often notice if I don't eat sufficient or frequently enough, brain fog, low energy, irritability, a headache. In the family of irritability, I also kind of tend to get overwhelmed, which leads to irritability and just as general saltiness. So if you're not noticing a stomach hunger, maybe you all are able to pick up on some other symptoms that you maybe just didn't have to recognize or pay that much attention to when your internal cues connection was stronger. I think of it kind of like a radio signal or a radio frequency. Maybe we have to dial in a little bit harder, a little bit closer to connect with those cues and also give consideration to other experiences that we are having in our body, but they might still be there. So again, just taking it back to square one, are you still doing your best to check in with your hunger and satiety? If you are doing your best, you're like, Annie, I have checked in, I have with myself 30 minutes before a meal, right before the meal, midway through the meal and after the meal for hunger and satiety, and I'm still struggling to discern if I am physically hungry or emotionally hungry, then next good spot to look at might be your balanced plates. Are you still building your balanced plates? Have the balance of your meals changed at all? Again, I know sometimes when I am feeling emotionally dysregulated, when I am working on lack of sleep, when I'm just feeling kind of off in my body because of medication, because of sickness, because of stress, sometimes the balance of my plates shift. They tend to get a little bit heavier on the carbs, lower on the protein and fat, and then that can affect my satiety. Or if the balance of your plates is still relatively the same, maybe the portion that you are serving yourself has either increased or decreased. Again, because the balanced plates works collectively as a whole. If you are noticing that, yeah, I'm increasing my carbs and I'm decreasing my fat, maybe you aren't as satiated as long through between meals. So give that some consideration. Have you noticed more eating outside of meal times? Are you noticing more grazing or more snacking? Are you noticing that you often have an urge to eat shortly after a meal or outside of your typical routine? Again, this is where we can pull on some of the other tools that we have in our toolbox. So maybe, for example, the clock might be a helpful tool for you in this situation. If you are noticing that I just ate lunch at noon and here it is at 1:30, I'm looking at the balance of my plate. I'm looking at the portions that I served myself. Everything looks as it should. It looks like sufficient food. I felt full enough or satisfied at the end of the meal. Maybe what I'm experiencing is emotional hunger. And what I'm curious about is this person in particular used the word cravings feel chaotic. And so that leads me to believe that maybe there is some more emotional hunger, and that might be, again, a result of increased joy, positivity, happiness, playfulness, fun, or it could be a swinging of a pendulum too from emotions as you are finding kind of your new balance or your new equilibrium. But if you are sensing that these cravings are coming on quickly, we've talked about this in our emotional eating mini course. We've talked about this on many podcasts. They come on quickly. They're very specific. For example, when you have a craving, it might sound like I want pizza from my favorite pizza place, or I want a very specific coffee drink from my favorite coffee shop, or I really want that dark chocolate peanut butter cup think I talked about that last week, that's in the fridge. You're not, when you are truly physically hungry, you are open to eating a wider variety of foods. When you are experiencing emotional cravings, you are more likely to notice something very specific. So I'm not interested in the green apple per se in the kitchen. I'm very interested in the dark chocolate peanut butter cup. That to me might be a sign or cue that it is a craving. It is not physical hunger, it is emotional hunger. And the other thing I think I got sidetracked here about the clock, where you can pull on the clock, is in addition to making sure that you are waiting between meals. Again, if you've had a satisfying meal and you're noticing that you're hungry sooner rather than later, or sooner than you typically would be, you can use the clock to kind of guide your eating, and maybe a more clock-led eating structure can help you reestablish a nice eating routine that works for your life. But also in the instance of a craving, you might play around with the clock as well and use a pause. We talk about this all the time in Balance 365, using the pause to set a timer, whatever you can reasonably withstand. Some members say 10 minutes, some members say that's way too long, some members say 5, some members say 3. Try setting a clock for 5 minutes and then checking back in. Do I still want that thing that I wanted 5 minutes ago, or has the craving passed? So maybe buy yourself just a little bit of time and see if the urge to eat dissolves or dissipates. Some other considerations might be your energy levels too. She mentioned that she was sluggish, feeling sluggish in her body. That has me curious about, could be certainly a side effect of the medication, but also sleep habit and movement habit as well. Sometimes when we are not sleeping, when we are undersleeping, when we're undermoving and we are overeating, that can lead to that feeling of just kind of like, I just don't feel very energized. Kind of like a weighted sense in our body that we just don't have this lightness to our life, this energy that we would like to see. So check in with your sleep as well and your movement habit. Doing the best you can. Again, this isn't about perfection. This is about just doing what you can in a reasonable manner at this stage of life. If you are working through high stress, maybe a movement habit isn't in the cards for you right now because of all that you have on your plate, but can you do some short walks here and there? Can you sneak in 1 or 2 workouts if you can't get your consistent 3 or 4? And then prioritizing sleep. Some other cues that you might also check in with if you're feeling a little disconnected from your internal cues is just your energy in general. Again, as I was saying a little bit ago, if I relied solely on my hunger earlier in the day with my medication, I would probably say, I'm not hungry, I don't need to eat. But because I know that if I start to experience low energy, that brain fog, that kind of slump, like I'm maybe a little bit more easily distracted, that is my sign that like, hey, it's time to eat. So checking in with your energy levels if they are extremely low, either because you haven't eaten or maybe extremely low because you have overeaten. That might be, again, another sign to you that if I'm not able to connect with my satiety at the meal, if I'm consistently noticing that 3 p.m. after lunch, I'm just like sluggish and I'm ready for a nap, that maybe I need to work on pulling back how much I eat at lunch. Again, you can do all of this in the absence of internal cues. Internal cues makes it a lot easier. They are super convenient and they're a great skill to have, but in this stage of life, maybe again, they aren't the most reliable. There's still other elements to consider. So don't get frustrated. Don't fret. You have other tools, you have other considerations you can pull on. I like to think of this as all just an experiment, and I'm taking in the data, everything from my habits, my internal cues as I can, my energy levels, my sleep, my movement, the balance of my meals, tracking my behaviors to help me assess if I'm being consistent or not, what areas I need to improve are still all available to you, even if your connection to your internal cues is a little fuzzy or some days feels completely non-existent. The last thing I want to touch on is the second question she asks is, are those cues less trustworthy in these situations? And I do want to note that, especially when it comes to sleep, I just talked about this last week. I gave, I think, 3 different members 3 reminders in 3 separate conversations that when you are struggling with sleep, sleep can affect your hormones, specifically your hunger and satiety hormones. So if you are experiencing low quality sleep, like broken sleep, or low volume of sleep, like you're just not sleeping enough. When you do sleep, you sleep soundly, but you're not getting enough sleep. You can anticipate an increased drive to eat, increased hunger, and also less likely to feel satisfied even when you've had your typical lunch, breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So on days when I am, or even weeks, or the days following poor sleep, again, if this might be, a month, multiple months, or even year-long situation that you are wrestling with sleep, doing the best you can to protect your sleep. But you can also anticipate on those days that you haven't slept well, I'm likely to feel hungrier. I'm likely to feel less satisfied even when I've had adequate amounts of food. And I'm more likely to reach for high carb, higher fat foods because that's my body's response, my hormonal shifts as a response to lack of sleep. Knowing that information, even before I get out of bed in the morning, saying, like, okay, we had a poor night's sleep. We can anticipate I'm going to have some desires to eat when I don't probably need to eat. I can anticipate some additional cravings. I can anticipate wanting more food, and I'm going to do my best to stick with my regular, consistent eating that I typically have on a day-to-day basis. That makes those days so much easier. So yes, you might notice a shift in your hunger and satiety, especially as it relates to shifts in sleep, but they hopefully, fingers crossed, are temporary. And once you return to higher quality sleep or more sleep, they will regulate themselves. But in the meantime, doing what you can to manage any additional cravings or drives to eat. Maybe that's looking at more convenience foods, having those on hand, curating your environment a little bit more, and then doing your best to get back to bed. Again, if this goes on for longer stretches, I would certainly encourage you to talk to your primary care doctor to see if there's any additional treatments or strategies that you can use to help protect your sleep. Okay, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out with me. I hope you all have a great Wednesday, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye, everyone.